So hi everyone. Thank you. I would say first I want to thank you for welcoming me at IGDC 2023. I'm super excited to be here for several reasons. First is it's my first time in India, so it's a big event for me. And a few days before I came to Hyderabad, I was in Delhi at an amazing event with Lumikai at Insignia, meeting game founders, a new generation of studios with very exciting missions, teams, and founders, even topics of leadership. And today I'm very grateful to be on stage, and I want to thank again the crew of IGDC, because my thanks is as well to you for bringing me on stage to talk about a topic that has been dear to me my whole career, my whole life, around people, team, culture, performance as well, and today specifically about psychological safety. So, as I begin, I don't know how familiar you are with psychological safety. If you've read about it, talked about it, think about it, please raise your hand just if you're familiar with it so I understand what's the level of knowledge here. All right, good, so good amount. But also, for some people, it's a new topic, so let me introduce you where it comes from. So if you don't know psychological safety, it came more popular in the term of as a workplace and how to build high-performance team. It came from a project from Google, 2016, where 180 teams were being observed for 2 years to understand what were the factors of high-performing teams. So there were teams that were delivering superior outcomes at Google, and they really wanted to engineer it in a way, and it's very Google. What do those teams have in common that make them perform better than others? And what they identified among several factors was what we can put into psychological safety, and I read it as well here for us today. In a team with high psychological safety, teammates feel safe to take risks around their team members. They feel confident that no one on the team will embarrass or punish anyone else for admitting a mistake, asking a question, or offering a new idea. And I got into that, how it's correlated to high performance, because further, there were further studies as well, so I recommend that book from Timothy Clark about the 4 stages of psychological safety and how it's correlated with high performance. Because it makes sense if you think about it, the safer you feel, then you have the courage to challenge the status quo. Especially in innovation and in games, we had to reinvent ourselves so many times. And then the idea doesn't only come from the top, the CEO or the founder, it comes from the teams, because they're the people making the games, they're on the operational level, and maybe they see even better what are the better solutions that you need to solve for your game or your product. So the safer the team is, the more they will make mistakes, try things, take risks, innovate and break through and overperform. That's the correlation. And that's why we're here today, as you are caring about how to improve the outcome of your team, the production, how it's correlated to psychological safety. So something you need to know about me, some of you know me because we've worked together or have followed Rise and Play. How I wanted to approach the talk today, I'm a very structured, methodical person. So I like to work with my to-do list, a plan, and methodical steps to get to performance. And that's what I wanted to offer about this talk today. And I covered, starting the talk with why it's important, in case you still wonder, how it's correlated with performance. What is psychological safety that we covered already in a few minutes. But the rest of my talk today is about the hardest point is how? How do we do this? How do we build psychological safety? How do we engineer it? And the thing is, I love to offer really an engineering solution on how to build psychological safety. It's very complex. Because psychological safety, it builds on trust first. What is trust? How do you build trust? How do you engineer trust? Do you know? It's not something you build by saying or doing, because if I'm telling you here today on stage, hey, trust me, I'm Sophie, I'm here at IGDC. Do you trust me if I ask you to trust me? Can you trust me? This is not how trust works. Why? It's like psychological safety. It's a feeling. It's a feeling. And because it's a feeling, it's much more complex to engineer. We talk about humans and people. You don't buy trust. You don't buy safety. It's a feeling you create. And that's what I want to tackle with you today. And also why I'm so excited about the topic, because while I feel very confident about building safety in teams, I don't know about studios here in your context, with your culture, in India. And that's what I would like to collaborate with you today to figure it out. So what can you take away today for the 45 minutes we have? I'd love to offer quick solutions. I know you came here and you have many other competing talks at the same time. It's almost lunchtime as well. I'd love to offer quick solutions that you can walk away from this talk to have high-performing teams from tomorrow. I want to manage expectation. I will not be able to deliver that, not in 1 hour. This is not going to happen. It takes time. What I can offer you today, and that's my promise, I will deliver some tools that you can use and apply to your team. And then you can build the right system for you and your culture. Because beyond humans, I believe more in system. A system stays after you, beyond you. And that's what you want to create, a system that continues to build high-performing teams. And that's why we're here today. So we are 5 minutes in the talk, and I have introduced myself. So some of you maybe know me. I know like some of you have followed my content on Rise and Play. But for the ones who don't know me, and what makes me legit to even talk about psychological safety in teams, that's my background. I've been working most of my career at game studios, 15 years, free-to-play mobile games. And I've seen a lot, actually, on the product management side. So I've been leading games, I run live ops. I've been also launching new games, fail new games. I've opened studios. I closed studios. I also led a studio post-acquisition from PlayStation. My previous studio was Savage Games. So I've seen a lot with teams, working with teams all around the world, and also in different contexts and in different phases. So that's why I can talk about the topic, because I had multiple data points to create a method around it. But today, I'm here with you, coming not from that place, but I would call myself as an expert on psychological safety. And why is that? Because I'm an expert in the lack of psychological safety. I know very much and very well how it feels to not feel safe. And that's why I can talk about it and relate a lot to teams that I've led, how it must have felt for them, and what was in the way for them to get to performance. So now I want to share my real story, because I gave you my credentials and all the things I've achieved. But my real story is this. So I don't know if you recognize, it's both people from Vietnam. My parents were both people. If you are familiar with it, it was in 1975. A lot of Vietnamese people flee the war, and then they moved to France. They met there. And then I was born in France. So that's the beginning of my journey, where I have a Vietnamese heritage. And also, I grew up in a French culture. And so my theme, my whole life was, who am I? What's my identity? Where do I belong? And it continued further in my own experience, where I lived and worked in Finland, at Rovio. And also now I live and work in Germany. So one thing of my life, despite the achievements I've had, I always have a little voice where I didn't feel safe. And that comes from that. And further in my career, I don't know if you know that mini animation movie from Pixar, I think it's called Pearl. I felt like that little wool ball character my whole career. The only woman in the room. The only Asian woman in the room. Or the only Asian woman in a leadership room. That's been my whole theme. And therefore, I know very well what it is to not feel safe in a group where I felt I did not belong. I did not look like the rest of the group. And so everything I could share when I felt like that single person, I didn't feel seen for who I truly was, not for my achievements, but who I truly was. And therefore, another theme was that I have not felt enough. Could push the achievements, never feeling enough. And so, as you hold to those things, this is how I really wanted to work hard to not that happening for teams, the teams I lead, because this gets in the way of performance. So I want to start, take a step back. As I shared today about psychological safety, it starts with trust. Trust is very complicated. And what I want to share here is a framework. How do you build trust? Because there's a way to engineer it. But it has to take a lot from you. And this is a framework from Frances Fry. She's a professor at Harvard. And how she identified how you build trust, it starts with several pillars. First, it starts with logic. How you build trust with someone, you need to understand their logic, how that person makes decisions, how do they think, how the brain works. And I give an example. If you are thinking by facts, and then you have someone who understands and makes decisions based on facts, yes, I trust that person. If you don't believe in feelings and emotions, I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's another way of making decisions, then you don't really trust a person making decisions based only on emotions. That's already a first point of how you build trust. Do you understand the logic of a person? And then the second pillar is empathy. Also, empathy covers many things, but a simple way for me to say it, you build trust by feeling that a person understands you, that they can see you. And that's how, with a team, do they feel that you care about them, that you really care about them, that you're listening to them, you see them. That's how you build trust. And the last pillar is authenticity. Authenticity, very simple word, but very difficult to execute. Can you be yourself? And those are the elements implicitly in our brain that makes us trust someone. And you, as a lead of your team, a founder, you have a team, how do you build trust to create those pillars with someone? And I want to here focus on one point that is around authenticity. And that's my very first step of how do you build psychological safety in a team? It starts with you, to be yourself. And here, I gave an example, be yourself. It's not your official self. I shared my official self. Your vulnerable self. That's when people start to trust you. And I want to refer back, if you're familiar with her, Brené Brown. She wrote a book about vulnerability. She had a TED Talk. And what she claims is that staying vulnerable is a risk we have to take if we really want to experience connection. And that's the first point for you as you start to build connection and trust with your team. Can you be vulnerable? And I have a hack for myself because it was a whole journey. Like I told you, my journey was to not feel safe until I became safe. When you share something vulnerable, it's not sharing something personal, like, oh, my dog is doing this at home. It's sharing something that you feel in your gut, it makes you uncomfortable. It's like, what if somebody is judging me for this? What if somebody doesn't like me for this? What if I look less credible to my team if I start to share this? This is when you know you gave away something that cost you to create a connection with someone. And I want to do a little experiment here for 5 minutes, a little workshop. I promised a workshop, so here I am, where I would like you to hold to those statements. If you ever felt that way in your whole life, personal, professional, or even recently, where you did not belong, you did not feel seen, or you didn't feel you were enough. And as you hold to that moment, I would like you to picture it. You can, close whatever works for you, where you did not feel safe, accepted, valued. And when that happened, who was involved? Who did that to you or did not do something to you that you felt that way? And I like to give it a rough minute, really, where you can picture this for yourself and hold to the feeling, how it feels, like really in your body. I'm not going to talk. All right, so as you picture this, and you hold to that moment that happened that probably makes you really sad, frustrated, probably a lot of negative feelings coming out, I would like you to bear with me and share your story. So, a little experiment here. I'm seeing that you all have a neighbor by your left or right, you choose, to connect, greet your neighbor, maybe you know your neighbor, and share your story mutually and listen to each other. And you came to this talk to want to have high-performing team, to learn more about psychological safety, then this is your moment as well to learn about it. So I give a few minutes if you like to practice. It's again optional, but you came here to learn, so I hope you also bear with me in this little exercise. I'll give it 1 more minute, and please hear the story of your other partner now, if you haven't yet. Sorry to interrupt, I saw like some very good chat, some smile, moments of connection. How did that feel? Good? Awkward? Comfortable? I'm sure mixed feelings as well. And for the ones as well who didn't feel like participating, it's also okay to hold to the feeling. It's uncomfortable. I can imagine in some cases you're talking to a stranger, you share something very vulnerable, and then at the cost of looking ridiculous or stupid. I know that feeling. But that's what your team most of the time feels as well. Because if you think about it, you hold a position of power. You are the leader. If you share something as a team member that makes you look stupid, incompetent, what's on the line? You may lose your job, you may lose your credibility, you may lose many things. So you can assume from the beginning your team is not going to tell you something vulnerable. And so my point here with this exercise, as you want to build psychological safety in your team, you can't create psychological safety for your team if you're not feeling psychologically safe yourself, with yourself in the first place, that you are willing to be vulnerable. How can we expect that from others if we are not able to give it to ourselves first? And that comes to my second point. You need to lead yourself. That's how you build high-performing teams. And by leading yourself, what do I mean? So leading the self, it starts with awareness. And because I do also coaching of teams, now I forgot to mention I'm working as an independent in games to exactly help studios with leadership topics. You only start to change and lead yourself once you are aware. And how aware are you of yourself? How much do you know yourself? What's happening inside you? What's happening around you? What's the impact on others of you being? And once you're aware, it's always a choice to take responsibility. Do you take responsibility for what's happening inside you and what's happening outside of you as a consequence? And that's the first point of leading the self, awareness and responsibility. And what it means concretely as well, you will have emotions. It's normal. Your team, it's okay for them to have emotions. You create the space for them again, safety for them to have emotions. But you as a leader, how do you appear with your emotions? Does that feel safe to have an angry leader that starts to yell and blame the teams for mistakes? But at the end of the day, you have a right to be angry. But the thing is, you need responsibility on how you manage your anger. You have much more responsibility than your team in how you manage your emotions. And that's another element of leading the self. And what's important here is like as you build awareness, take responsibility, manage yourself, your emotions. It's not a one-shot thing. You have to be consistent in what you do over time. Because what it is, when you do actually what you say you will do, and also you do it over time, you build consistency and predictability for your team. And that's how it builds safety. Because they know who you are, they know what to expect from you, and even if you explode one day, it's okay. They understand and remember it's not going to have a consequence on my job. So you have to really understand and lead yourself over time, and that's what creates the second pillar of psychological safety. And here I want to share some tools. I won't have the time today to go in depth in it, but that's also what I work with founders. Those are some tools to practice more how to lead yourself. Journal. I don't know if you do it already, but if you don't, start. Reflect on yourself. What's happening inside you? Where are you going with your company, your team? Why are you doing this? What's in you that is affecting how you lead your production? And for that, it comes to another important point. Do you have time to think? Are you sitting to think? I know it sounds very counterintuitive. We expect leads to produce an outcome, that's not your job. It's the job of your team to produce an outcome. Your job is to create the frame, the environment, and the big picture. So the best way you can spend your time is thinking about like how you want to lead and dedicating time, what I call white space. Other tools that I use is body awareness. If you're not familiar on how to read your emotions, because we are, I don't know, at least more in Europe, we are a society that is completely disconnected from emotions. You can read a lot of emotions in yourself through body awareness. If you're familiar with that, so it's another tool. Feedback. How do you receive feedback? Because you are the center of impact. Are you getting feedback on yourself? I know it's very uncomfortable and hard, but are you getting feedback on how you're doing as a leader? How are you doing? If you don't get, you can't get better. So it's time also to think of how can you create a system of feedback towards you. And other tools, meditation, coaching that I'm doing, like I said, and sometimes it's necessary counseling. So I mean by that therapy. Because back to psychological safety, sometimes it has origins way, way before your career, your upbringing. And if you don't solve that as a leader, this will come to work with you. Your fears, your anger, your trauma. And like I said, I started from a place not feeling safe. If you don't work on yourself, your team will never feel safe if you don't feel safe yourself. And so something I remind myself a lot, because I've worked in games where, again, the whole turbulence of hyper-casual market, how to make a hit, how to close a studio, to accept the things I cannot change, because there are so many things we cannot change, but having the courage to change the things only we can change, and having the wisdom to make the difference between the things we can change and the things we cannot change. And those are principles from Stoicism, if you're familiar also with that philosophy, ancient, like very ancient philosophy. And that leads me to my point, is like the only thing you can control is you, your perception of events, your actions, your reactions. And then only you can have impact on the world, on your team, on the company performance, and all the rest. So if you want to start to do a change, it starts with you. And that's why my two first steps here on psychological safety are built around work on you. And so as you have covered like everything, done the whole groundwork for yourself, now it's time to build your environment, your culture, the system of a culture of feedback. And I don't know if you're familiar with the 4 stages of forming of a team. I recommend it's a great framework, but your team doesn't form before it storms. So if you have a team that is agreeing, having a good time, good day, and it's great, but they are not in the full potential of performing, because performance has to go through the stages of disagreement, conflict, tension. This is where you challenge the idea, because you have the intelligence of everyone put together to go to a better collective outcome. And as you build your team performance, where you want to get to is as fast as possible and as effectively as possible to conflict. And that's why safety matters, because your team can break in that stage. And I'm sure some of you have experienced it. Because in the end, conflict, if it doesn't exist, it gets in the way of performance. And so you have, if you don't have conflict, you have artificial harmony in your team, but then no one is telling the truth. And so that even makes it more relevant why having trust as a foundation and safety is necessary so your team can have conflict and then perform. So this is where the team feels by default. You can assume that it's easier to start this way. You start a new job, like put yourself, again, empathy in the shoes of your team member. You have to prove yourself, and there's going to be a cost to make a mistake. And this is a loop that repeats itself and start to build the culture you're having. So ask yourself what happens in your team when a mistake happens. And if it's not talked about, it's blamed, it's punished, you are not in a psychological safe culture. And where you want to move to is in that cycle where mistakes are talked about, you learn from them, there's a virtuous circle, and is repeated 100 times. This is how you have a culture of psychological safety. It's consistency over time. And I want to share for the rest of the talk about the tools I have used in my teams. And again, it starts with you. And so very simple things, it starts with you saying thank you. Because as you start to open your system and ask people, give feedback, if people come to you with feedback, sometimes it's, unpolished, it's not always helpful. People come to you with courage to give feedback. And if you brush them away, they will not give feedback. So it's really important that you discipline yourself to receive feedback. Somebody comes and tells you something you don't like to hear, just say thank you. It's a good practice. Thank you, but now it doesn't work for me. Just say thank you. That's the first point. Because then the person remembers it was okay to give feedback, and I keep doing that. Second is, what is the place? Where is the place you talk about your mistakes? Because, again, teams, if you want teams to celebrate, learn from mistakes, if you as a leader, as the role model, you are not talking about your own mistakes, how can you expect your team will do as well? So think about what is the space you can create to share your mistakes and failures of projects. In games, 10% rates of success, like startup, same, there are so many failures. Where is the space where you talk about your failures and learn from it? Because that's how a team gets better again. So those are the systems. I'll let you take the screenshots. I'm not going to go in detail about it, and I'm happy to follow up more after the talk on some of those. But you can create several spaces where that culture of feedback starts to happen. Retrospectives, like it's in a team setting. Pre-mortem, what can kill our game, or product, or company. Post-mortem, after a failure happened. Another space as a leader you can create for yourself is AMA, or all-hands meeting. This is your chance to share learnings and mistakes. One-on-ones with people. Use that opportunity to collect feedback on yourself. Show and tell, then you have other setups that are for the team, like having game reviews, playtests. Usually those are comfortable because we talk about the game, we criticize the game, not the people. And other informal events that are very, very actually helpful is team events off-site. People talk, people loosen up, and this is where you have to listen carefully because people will tell you what they truly think about the culture, the company, and if they don't believe in the game you're making. And then you have other systems you can create which are indirect, because not everyone is comfortable to give feedback, being, showing yourself. It needs trust and practicing, like a muscle. So you can make your AMA anonymous. You can do a team survey. I'll get into that in a moment. And also you can use Q&A in all hands. So I don't know if you have used any of that tool, a culture handbook. Companies like Netflix, Valve, with Stream, then Supercell, Metacore, big companies have started their company with a handbook. And I want to share an inspiring story where I was in Delhi as well, meeting with some of the founders there. I met Ram, one of the co-founders of CuriousBit, and they had a handbook. They started the company like this, 70 pages. And this is your opportunity to write down all the ways you desire for your team to work. It creates safety because they know it's okay to give feedback. So you create the frame. And back to, if you want to receive a good feedback from your team, you start to create a framework on how is the way to give feedback, how to have conflicts, how to handle disagreements, and code of conduct. That's the beginning of it. And I want to share some parts of my own handbook that I created 3 years ago created my own studio. And I started to hire like this. I showed it very transparently so people knew where they were getting themselves into. And what I wrote down, it has also like 50 pages, how to deliver constructive feedback, like very, very detailed. It's online on my resources, by the way, so you can have access to it. How to have conflicts, personal conflicts in one-on-one. So those are like some of the tools you can use. Create your culture book. Another tool that I've used is the Team Pulse survey. So I took the survey and questions from a research project that has been conducted, I think it was almost 10 years ago, looking at all the successful companies and projects called the Game Outcome Project, and they were looking at all the factors that led the team to, again, perform in games. And all those factors were around alignment on vision, mission, team culture, the ways of working, a clear development plan. And I use from that research all the questions to make it a survey for my own team, and I check the polls every 2-3 months to see where we're going, how are we doing as a team, especially as you grow more and more. Is everyone aware of what's the mission, what's the value of even the ways of working? And then I present it to the team as well, the results, so we always are aware where we are. And I give example here of how I follow the trends, and this is more at the performing stage of the team, so it's not to show that we were doing great as a team, because when we started, it started more as a scale of 2. And it was all right because we just started. We didn't trust each other. We were very, storming. We were a bit confused where to go, finding our direction. But those are examples that I give to the team as well to follow. Are we still aligned as a group to know where we're going and how? And I also have questions about how do they feel to give feedback. And it's anonymous. That's why everyone shares very, sometimes critical feedback through that tool as well. Anonymous AMA, very handy, so Slido does it. You can also throw it before your own hands and ask team to throw questions. And I'll tell you, if you start to do it, be ready for uncomfortable questions. Because there will be uncomfortable questions. Questions about salaries. Questions about how much money do we have in the bank. Questions about, is the company going to sell? What about my job? But this is why you create safety again, being transparent. It's an opportunity for you, if you want to go to all hands with your team, to talk about those things. But also you have a choice to close it and not have all the questions. That's why it's very important to frame it. What are the questions you expect there? And the questions back to your culture book that you will not accept. For example, if people are criticizing each other through an MAA, it's the wrong place, right? So you want to make sure that people are so productive in asking questions there. And my last point, which is also for today, with all the things I've shared, what are the tools, what can you do with it? It's really important that as those tools, you take it for your own context and culture. Because my first disclaimer, those tools, they have worked really well for me and my teams in Europe, but maybe they will not work for you, so you have to find your how. And that's not my job to figure out the solutions for you, but here I set, again, the framework and the system and the tools that you can use to reach the next level of performance of your team. And I want to give an example here why it matters, because if you're not familiar with Culture Map, it's Erin Meyer, she mapped all the cultures of the world and how it translates into a way of being and behavior. And how it is affecting the work. It's affecting how we give feedback, because some cultures are very direct, some are indirect, some are confrontational. And I want to share here, although I have an Asian background, and I grew up in an Asian family where we were very indirect and non-confrontational, I developed towards more German, Finnish culture, very direct and confrontational, if you have a bit of that vibe of me today. But I've worked with team members who are more on that other side of the spectrum. And maybe you find yourself more on that side of the spectrum where you are more in indirect culture. You are non-confrontational, and it's not a bad thing, it's just to acknowledge it. And as you start, you have to ask yourself, how can I get feedback given where I am in the spectrum? What kind of system that will work for my team? Second disclaimer with all I shared, psychological safety, you can create a collective sense of psychological safety. That's what it is about today. But your job is not to fix a person's lack of psychological safety. And I want this to be really important, because to set the expectation right with your team, your job is to create the space for the team as a group and at work. But psychological safety, it's a very complex topic where it can come from home, there are problems maybe personal, it's money problem, That's not your job to do that. And your job is to make it a little better as a group, as someone maybe not feeling so safe feels a little safer working with you. And the last for today, for me, if there's something you need to remember, is everything I share with you, nothing will change if you don't change yourself. That starts with you. Like all the tools you can build, but if you build your safety and you appear safe, confident, having a good self-esteem, that's how you create safety with your team. And so today, I wanted to cover 4 stages of psychological safety, but the one that matters really, it's the foundation. Because after, you just in full speed and you continue, and grow. But first, you need to have the foundation right. And so I will summarize here the things maybe for you to take away. And I put my coaching hat here. I will ask questions, because I'm not going to give you solutions. You know your solutions for yourself. But vulnerability, today from that talk, what does it look like for you to be vulnerable? What will you do to be a bit more vulnerable with your team? Self-leadership, managing your emotions, knowing yourself, having awareness, taking responsibility. If you're not doing this today, what's in the way? And what will you do about it? Feedback. With all the tools I've shared, I'm sure there are many more. What will you create to start to create that feedback loop for your team and yourself? And last, context matters. Each of you have your own team, your own culture. What will you try, and what will work for you, and what will not work? And I wish you a good practicing from everything I shared today. And I love, from that talk, for some of you to follow up and let me know how it went for you, because I'm very curious as well how you build psychological safety in teams, in your context and in your culture. And here there are some other resources that I've shared today, so you can take a screenshot and I'll put it also online. I'm very grateful and for the attention as well for you to coming here curious to learn about how to build better performing teams and starting with yourself. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Sophie, for the great presentation. If anybody has a question, we can take 1 or 2 questions now. Any questions? Yeah, there.
Hi, hi Sophie. Thank you for the session. It was really insightful about the safety in the work culture. So myself, Saravanan, I work with EA as a game designer. So my question is regarding the context part you talked about, where based on your team, the location, we have direct and indirect feedback, right? So you're saying the process is same. I mean, the process is different when I was going through the description, but the outcome is similar. That's what you're trying to say. Because I had experience working in both the regions, so now I'm expecting the same thing what I experienced from the Europe region. Now I'm with Indian studio. So a person like me who have this conflict, but I came from a direct feedback team and working on an indirect feedback team. So what should be my expectation? Like, should I adapt to the indirect thing, or how should I go forward?
Thanks for the question. And it's a tricky one because also we work with more global teams. That's a reality. But even inside the same culture, you may have different behavior. That's why the mapping is interesting. I think, again, it's back to the lead. What is the culture you want? And then you can't ask and force people to adapt, but you create the system that will try to respect a bit the differences. So when I built my studio, I had a mix of people with more indirect culture, Asian as well, maybe 30%. So they were an important size in the team, and they were very valuable for the perspective. So in the end, it was about creating what kind of, you give options for people to give feedback. You can give me feedback directly, or you can choose the channel of indirect feedback and anonymous. So you want to make sure, respecting the culture or personality, character, that you have the different options and channel to create the culture you want. But it starts with you define the culture at the beginning as the lead, and you explain for people, and then you help them get there to you, right? I hope it answered.
Yeah, thank you. And one more thing is when you talked about the illustration about the trust, we had 3 pillars.
Yes.
Logic, authenticity, and empathy. I got the logic and authenticity part, but empathy, can you just give us more context about the empathy part?
Sorry, what is the question?
So about the logic, about the trust graph you had 3 pillars.
Yes.
So logic, authenticity, and empathy.
Empathy, yes.
So empathy part is something I'm trying to understand more.
Yeah.
So could you please elaborate the empathy part alone?
Yeah, so empathy is how you build connection to understand, make someone feel seen. So I put myself in the shoes of a team member. I have had boss as well. And when you have problems, as a team member, I have problems and it makes me concerned, worried. if my lead is like, I don't care about your problems, fix it, and come back to me when you have solved. This is where you don't have empathy, because someone comes to you and saying, I'm stressed about it, and I need help to solve the problem. And then if you don't understand that, this is the opposite of empathy. So empathy is, I understand you, and I'll show you that I understand you. So how do you build empathy? Somebody is talking to you, you're able to repeat what they just said. So if I understood correctly, I give an example, you feeling this way and you are having this problem like this, is that correct? Like the person say, oh yeah, exactly. Thank you for saying this is how you build empathy. Does that answer more concretely? And it's something you can practice with people. So if you see that spark in their eyes and say, yes, thank you for understanding, this is how you build empathy.
Thank you.
One last question from anyone, if anybody's up. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. My name is Swapnil. I don't actually have a question, sorry, but I just wanted to make another point for the empathy. So I was an employee before, I'm an employer now. So one thing that I realized was recently one of my employees, he talked to me about the compensation, about the raise. And from an employer's point of view, now I understand that, being an employee myself, it's actually very difficult to have that conversation with your boss, because what that employee must be feeling is, what if my boss fires me just because I'm asking the raise? So you have to understand from an employee's point of view how some of these things are actually difficult when they are approaching you, when they're giving you feedback, or when they're asking you questions or things like that. So that's why empathy is also a very important point, I feel like.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that point. There's so much more to it. Thanks a lot. And I think it's great when you went through the levels and you find yourself being the boss one day, showing like, I've been there and I understand what you're going through and this discomfort. So thanks a lot for raising the point.